One of the most fascinating and enduring mysteries of our planet's deep prehistory has to be the intriguing case of the largest ape species known to have ever existed, an enormous relative of modern-day orangutans. This giant primate inhabited the tropical forests of Southeast Asia from about 2 million years ago until sometime just after 300,000 years ago. Called Gigantopithecus blacki, this animal is only known from highly fragmentary remains, consisting entirely of fossilized teeth and isolated lower jaws, with no evidence of bones from the body having yet been discovered. Nevertheless, it's clear from these limited remains that Gigantopithecus lived up to its name. This creature was truly enormous, with some estimates suggesting its total standing height could reach up to 3 meters, that's over 9.8 feet. Similarly, weight estimates have put its body mass at between 200 and 300 kilograms, or around 440 to 660 pounds. However, given the incomplete nature of its skeleton, other scientists have urged caution when estimating its total body size, as it can get pretty speculative. As such, heights more in the range of 2.3 meters or over 7.5 feet might be more realistic. Still, that's a scarily giant ape. There's little doubt then that these beasts could have grown larger than modern gorillas, considering the unusually large size of their teeth compared to those of modern primates, thereby making Gigantopithecus the biggest ape to ever walk our planet. But there's still so much mystery surrounding these animals. Despite being known to science since the 1930s, we're lacking so much information concerning the precise anatomy of these orangutan relatives, and even their evolutionary relationships have only been fully confirmed in recent years. And why exactly did these large primates go extinct? One question that often arises when considering Gigantopithecus is whether these animals could have encountered ancient human species. What would such an encounter have been like? What would each species have made of the other? And was it the arrival of humans to this part of the world that may even have played a role in the extinction of Gigantopithecus? Gigantopithecus was first discovered by scientists when a German-Dutch paleontologist named Ralph von Koenigswald was searching for fossils in a drugstore in Hong Kong in 1935. That may sound like an odd place to go fossil hunting, but von Koenigswald knew he'd find them there, as he had worked in a museum in Munich, which had previously purchased an extensive collection of fossil teeth from drugstores where they were being sold as dragon teeth, an ingredient in traditional medicines. Von Koenigswald, at the time working for the East Indies Geological Survey, came across 2 isolated but absolutely enormous molars that clearly belonged to some sort of hominid primate. Immediately, von Koenigswald recognized that this was something new, and named the species Gigantopithecus blacki in an article published in 1935. Over the next few years, he acquired several more teeth from apothecaries that he thought belonged to Gigantopithecus. But then, during World War II, von Koenigswald was captured on Java and imprisoned by Japanese forces as a war criminal. To prevent his hominid teeth and other fossils from being confiscated, he entrusted his wife and several friends with his collection just before his capture. Incredibly, there's even a story that some of the Gigantopithecus fossils were sealed away in a milk bottle and buried in one of his friend's gardens to keep them safe. Following the war, von Koenigswald recovered the fossils and relocated to New York, but was unable to continue his research on the teeth and their origins as he suffered health issues stemming from his imprisonment. Later, in the 1950s, paleontologists in China located the sites from which the Gigantopithecus teeth had come. These caves in southern China preserved sediment records from the past few millions of years, and from them, they were able to recover more teeth from the mystery ape. Then, in 1956, the first mandible of Gigantopithecus turned up when a local villager was digging cave sediment for fertilizer. In 1957, a survey team started to further excavate the cave that yielded the mandible, and between then and 1963, they recovered another 2 partial mandibles from the ape, as well as more than 1,000 isolated teeth. This astonishing abundance of the primate led to the cavern being given the nickname of Gigantopithecus Cave. Additional discoveries of teeth in other caves have since been made across southern China and possibly in northern Vietnam. The 4th mandible found to belong to the species was reported only in 2015 from another cave in China. In 2016, a couple of potential mandible fragments were reportedly located on the Indonesian island of Java, though some researchers doubt whether they truly originate from there or if they actually come from another source that initially obtained them from China. So it's been 90 years since Gigantopithecus was first recognized by science, and yet still all we have are teeth and lower jaws. Lots of teeth, mind you, and scientists have been able to extract information about the protein sequences of the animal from one of these teeth, a 1.9 million-year-old molar. Dental enamel protein sequences were reconstructed and used to show that Gigantopithecus is indeed a relative of orangutans, being the sister lineage to the modern Pongo genus and last sharing a common ancestor with them some 12 to 10 million years ago. In addition, the anatomy of the teeth and mandibles, plus the carbon and oxygen isotopic compositions of the tooth enamel, indicate that Gigantopithecus was herbivorous, and fed on fruits, plant stems, leaves, and possibly tubers. But the lack of good fossils does still mean that reconstructions of the giant beasts are largely speculative in nature. Of course, the close relationship to orangutans helps to inform us a great deal about the likely appearance of Gigantopithecus, and basing its proportions and mode of locomotion on the largest living primate, the gorilla, in the way they mostly adopt a quadrupedal stance, does seem reasonable. The key question we're asking here though is, did Gigantopithecus ever encounter prehistoric humans? Well, the short answer is probably. Paleo-artistic reconstructions of the great ape famously illustrate the animal interacting with Homo erectus individuals, most notably in a depiction by the legendary Czech paleoartist Zdeněk Burian, dating to the 1970s. This image in particular really does make me feel bad for the Gigantopithecus. It looks so confused as to why all these smaller apes are attacking it with pointy sticks. Other depictions, such as this one by paleoartist Mark Whitten, or this by John Sibbick, similarly show encounters between Homo erectus and the titanic orangutan relative. Additionally, this piece by the incredibly talented paleoartist Rudolf Hima, which was commissioned for this video, features another example of a potential interaction between these species of primates. Do be sure to follow Rudolf on Instagram to see more stunning artwork of prehistoric animals. A link to his page will be in the description. But do we have direct evidence for these crossovers between Homo erectus and Gigantopithecus? Well, we do know that members of the Homo genus were indeed living in Southeast Asia around the time that Gigantopithecus roamed the region's tropical forests. Homo erectus originated on the African continent about 2 million years ago, and by at least 1.5 million years ago, and possibly even earlier than this, populations of this human species had reached Southeast Asia. Homo erectus appears to have been the first of the ancient members of the Homo genus to expand significantly out of Africa, where the oldest fossils belonging to this species have been discovered, and to explore the vast new environments available to them across Eurasia. These expansions predate the most recent dispersals of our own species out of Africa by several hundreds of thousands of years, and the details of where and when the various human entities we classify as distinct species existed in Asia are still much discussed. But Homo erectus would have been in the right places at the right times to overlap with Gigantopithecus, considering that evidence of this ancient Homo existing up until just 108,000 years ago on Java has been reported. So from around 1.5 million years ago to just over 100,000 years ago, they were present in Southeast Asia for a substantial period alongside Gigantopithecus. In 1996, scientists reported on discoveries made in a cave in northern Vietnam that seemed to provide the most direct evidence yet found for the co-occurrence of Homo erectus and Gigantopithecus. Dating to around 475,000 years old, the cave contained deposits including hominoid teeth identified as belonging to both Homo erectus and Gigantopithecus, indicating that they were both living in the same place and at roughly the same time, resulting in their teeth getting washed into the same cave by an ancient river and preserved in the same sediments. However, other scientists later re-examined the supposed Gigantopithecus teeth from this cave and concluded that they were not from the giant ape. Instead, they reckon they came from an extinct orangutan species called Pongo weidenreichi, a smaller species than Gigantopithecus. A similar case of probable mistaken identity occurred in 1985, when a mandible fragment from a hominin, purported to be Homo erectus, was discovered in a cave in China alongside 16 Gigantopithecus teeth. But years later, this mandible was reinterpreted as belonging to a different kind of non-human great ape, and so we still have yet to find Homo erectus fossils in direct association with Gigantopithecus, it seems. Nevertheless, it's an entirely reasonable assumption to make that these two different primates could have encountered one another. But what would such an encounter have been like for both species? It's a tantalizing thought, if entirely speculative, given how little we have to go on. But would these ancient humans and gigantic orangutans have retreated at the first glimpse of one another? Or would things have become more violent? Well, we know that Homo erectus was a highly effective hunter, so it's not too far-fetched to imagine groups of this archaic human attempting to take down Gigantopithecus individuals, as paleoartists have often portrayed. In fact, some researchers have suggested that overhunting or competition for resources by ancient hominins such as Homo erectus could have contributed to the extinction of Gigantopithecus. However, more recent work favours the idea that the giant apes were instead the victims of a changing climate, as their preferred forest habitats retreated and they struggled to adapt to the more open environments they faced around 300,000 years ago. Nevertheless, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that more than a fair few Gigantopithecus likely met their ends at the hands of some particularly brazen Homo erectus. These archaic relatives of ours were the architects of some deadly stone tool cultures, and armed with these weapons, they certainly could have done damage to the massive orangutan relatives. We have evidence that erectus were hunting elephants and other large prehistoric animals they coexisted with, and so, although there's nothing like direct evidence of any butchering marks on Gigantopithecus mandibles or an association with stone tools, I don't think they would necessarily have been off the menu. However, I don't know if they'd have been their preferred prey sources. We know so little about the Gigantopithecus animal itself that it's impossible to say with any certainty how they may have reacted to coming across a little bipedal primate, but it is fun to imagine anyway. I think it's probably safe to say that any hunting attempts by archaic Homo individuals would have been pretty dangerous affairs, considering the enormous size of a fully grown Gigantopithecus. And from what we know of gorilla anatomy and behaviour, you really wouldn't have wanted to mess with a very angry gigantic orangutan. I have to imagine that 100 Homo erectus versus 1 Gigantopithecus would have been a bloodbath. Some scientists have attempted to glean insights into potential Gigantopithecus behaviour using what's known of their jaw and tooth anatomy. Comparing the few known mandibles of the ape, paleontologists note that there's a significant size difference between the largest and smallest, and in the larger one, the canines are much taller and have a greater cross-sectional area. Additionally, the numerous isolated canines from the species can be sorted into two distinct size categories as well. Since they seem to nicely fit into two distinct morphs, these differences are assumed to be sex-related. So Gigantopithecus was likely sexually dimorphic, with the males presumed to have been much larger and with bigger canines than the females, similar to what we see with living gorillas. This has led to some suggestions that Gigantopithecus males would have faced some level of competition with one another, as these greater body sizes and enlarged canines were selected for, and therefore must have provided some kind of reproductive advantage to them. Although it's also worth noting that the canines in both sexes were not particularly pronounced overall, and so despite them being relatively larger in males, it's doubtful that canine displays were an especially important component of their competitive or antagonistic behaviours, which interestingly contrasts with many examples of living apes. So, does this perhaps mean that large male Gigantopithecus individuals would have been particularly aggressive, and therefore attempting to hunt one was a very bad idea? Well, again, it's entirely speculative and we're basing all this inferred behaviour off incredibly incomplete fossils. But I, for one, would not be going anywhere near a giant competitive male Gigantopithecus. Just because they were herbivorous doesn't mean they weren't formidable creatures. These beasts certainly wouldn't have been defenseless against Homo erectus attacks, that's for sure. Now, continuing along the line of pure speculation, another topic that always arises regarding Gigantopithecus is, of course, its role in cryptozoological lore. The existence of a real, enormous primate in the fossil record has, understandably, excited cryptozoologists, those who study and search for mystery unconfirmed animals, such as Bigfoot and the Yeti. In fact, one cryptozoologist even went so far as to suggest the binomial name for the Sasquatch as Gigantopithecus canadensis. Although this might imply an intriguing interpretation of Bigfoot as a member of the Pongone subfamily, the orangutan lineage, rather than as closer to humans, this cryptozoologist actually considered Gigantopithecus to be a relative of humans, not orangutans. In this version of the Bigfoot lore, I suppose a population of human-like Gigantopithecus must have dispersed from Southeast Asia and into North America sometime in the past several hundreds of thousands of years, presumably across the Bering Land Bridge, eventually giving rise to this North American species that survived to the modern day. Of course, we now know for certain that Gigantopithecus was related to orangutans, and most Bigfoot descriptions make it seem much more hominin-like rather than pongine-like anyway. So it seems Gigantopithecus is not a good match for the Sasquatch. Unless, of course, they independently evolved very human-like anatomical traits, making Bigfoot a pongine that converged with hominins. And therein lies one of the many issues with cryptozoology: speculative world building, in which completely made-up interpretations of a creature's evolutionary history are invented to explain a cryptid. Great fun though, as long as it's not taken too seriously. But personally, I think if there really is an undiscovered non-human primate living in the wilderness of North America, it wouldn't be descended from Gigantopithecus. Gigantopithecus has also been raised as an explanation for the Yeti, another crypto-hominid reported from the Himalayas. It's certainly much geographically closer to where we have records of Gigantopithecus, compared to explaining its crossing over to North America. This idea was popularized when a zoologist claimed the 1951 photos of an alleged Yeti footprint could have been made by a surviving Gigantopithecus walking bipedally, just like a human. However, much doubt has been cast on the authenticity of this footprint, with it seeming likely that it was probably hoaxed. And then of course you also have to explain the 300,000 years of Gigantopithecus absence from the sedimentary records of caves in Southeast Asia. Overall, it just doesn't seem likely that the largest ape to have ever existed could have gone unnoticed in our modern world. The phenomenon of crypto-hominids is a fascinating one though, and the widespread reports of these creatures from all over the world do perhaps hint at some shared cultural concept between humans, that of the others, those hairy wild men living out there beyond what we consider our familiar places. It's tempting to see this as some kind of lasting legacy from the times when Homo sapiens was not the only human species on Earth, and we would have encountered those others who looked similar to us but weren't quite the same. Although Gigantopithecus went extinct far too long ago for any modern Homo sapiens culture to remember them, I do wonder if the Homo erectus populations living in this part of the world during and after the reign of those giant apes were haunted by memories of Gigantopithecus. One can imagine stories being passed down through generations about the enormous hairy men who dwelled in the forests just beyond. Almost like us, but not quite. Well, there we have it. To summarize, did humans ever meet Gigantopithecus? Quite probably, but we have yet to find direct evidence. Everything else about the nature of these encounters is complete speculation, but very fun to think about. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I do hope I made it clear enough that a lot of this is very speculative and based on incredibly fragmentary data. I also just really wanted to talk about the cryptozoology aspect too. I find it a fascinating topic. There is still some great science that's been done with Gigantopithecus, and I really look forward to seeing what we find out next about this marvelous giant ape. Now, before we end the video, I have a very exciting announcement to make. You may remember that last year we worked with the wonderful people over at Plush Foundry to bring you an adorable Spinosaurus plushie, Swimbo. Everyone loved Swimbo so much that we've been very excited to work on another plushie, and so it's with great pleasure that I introduce to you Boris the Borealopelta. Borealopelta Mark Mitchellii is the name of the stunning nodosaur specimen on display at the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Canada, truly one of the most stunning fossils ever discovered. We thought this species would make a perfect plushie because, first of all, ankylosaurs are adorable, secondly because you guys voted for it in a poll we ran to choose our next plushie, and also because we actually have an idea of what colours Borealopelta would have been in life, thanks to the incredible preservation of this fossil. The upper surface of the dinosaur would have been a reddish-brown colour, while the underside was a paler shade. So Boris is a plushie with accurate dinosaur colours. How cool is that? Boris also features the formidable shoulder spines as you can see on the real fossil, and I have to say that he is just adorably chunky. I mean, look at that face on view. He's so round, I love him so much. This Boris is currently the only one that's been made so far, and will need your help to make Boris the Borealopelta a reality. So if you'd like to be able to purchase your own, head over to the Plush Foundry page linked below and pre-order your very own Boris. He'll only be available to buy if the funding campaign is successfully reached, so please do be sure to support it. The campaign will last for a month from this video's upload, and then after this the plushies will be created and sent out to everyone who ordered one, if it's successfully funded. You should get them between 3 to 4 months after the campaign ends, and remember, these are limited edition plushies that won't be made again, so this is your only chance to get one. So share this around with anyone you know who might want their own accurate Borealopelta plushie. Please do like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it, and be sure to press that bell icon so you don't miss our next upload, and so you can learn more about our world, its history, and the wonderful life that surrounds us all.